The air in my own bedroom felt stolen. I sat frozen in my desk chair, the glow of the laptop screen painting my face in a pale, sickly light. My heart was a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. On the screen, a single untitled text file was open, a file I didn't create, a file that hadn't been there 5 minutes ago when I'd gotten up to make tea. It contained just one sentence, typed out in the stark default font, like a message from the void itself. It said, "I like the way you hum when you work." My breath hitched. I hadn't just been humming. I'd been humming a specific, obscure indie song I'd had stuck in my head all day. It wasn't something you'd hear through the walls. To know that, you'd have to be close. Very close. A wave of nausea washed over me as I slowly, deliberately scanned the small space of my studio apartment. The closed bedroom door, the sliver of the living room visible in the hallway, the deep, impenetrable shadows that gathered in the corners, shadows that suddenly seemed to be breathing. This wasn't the first strange thing to happen, not by a long shot, but it was the first time it felt like a direct message. The first time the creeping, formless dread that had been my unwanted roommate for weeks had finally looked me in the eye and spoken. To understand the depth of the violation, you have to understand what this apartment meant to me. My name is Alex. I'm a 27-year-old remote data analyst, which is a fancy way of saying I spend 8 hours a day staring at spreadsheets so I can spend the rest of my time on my real passion, painting. For years, I'd lived in a cramped, shared house with roommates who treated the kitchen like a science experiment and the living room like a 24-hour convenience store. Saving up for my own place was an obsession. I'd worked overtime, taken on freelance gigs, and lived on ramen and dreams. This apartment was the finish line. It was a pre-war building with good bones, high ceilings, and a massive bay window in the living room that flooded the space with golden afternoon light, perfect for an artist. It was my sanctuary, my fortress of solitude, the first place in my adult life that was entirely, unequivocally mine. Or so I thought. The first couple of weeks were pure bliss. I arranged my furniture, hung my paintings, and reveled in the glorious silence. I could leave my shoes in the middle of the floor. I could sing off-key in the shower. I could finally breathe. Then the little things started, the glitches in the matrix, as I first called them. I'd come home from a walk to find a coffee mug I'd left on the counter sitting neatly in the sink. I'd chalk it up to my own forgetfulness. I'm an artist, a bit of a space cadet at times. It was easy to believe I'd just forgotten.
Then, my keys, which had a designated bowl by the door they lived in religiously, would turn up on my nightstand. Strange, but plausible. Maybe I was tired when I came in. The thermostat was the first thing that gave me a real pause. I like it cold when I sleep, so I'd crank it down to 68 degrees every night without fail. I started waking up in the middle of the night, sweating, to find it set to exactly 74 every single time. My best friend, Chloe, laughed when I told her over the phone. "The building probably has a central system that overrides the local ones," she'd said, her voice a comforting wave of logic. "Or you've got a ghost who hates the cold." We joked about it. I named him Toasty the Ghost. It was easier to laugh than to confront the cold knot of unease tightening in my stomach. But the knot kept tightening. One evening, I was working late on a project, lost in the zone. I had my headphones on, the music just loud enough to drown out the world. I took them off to stretch, and in the sudden, ringing silence of the apartment, I heard it, a soft, scraping sound. It was coming from inside my walk-in closet. My blood went icy. I held my breath, straining to listen. It was the sound of a clothes hanger being slowly, deliberately slid along the metal rod. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a thick art history textbook, and crept towards the closet door. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely grip the doorknob. I counted to 3, flung the door open, and raised the book, ready to swing. Nothing. Just my clothes hanging neatly in rows, perfectly still. The air was heavy, stagnant. But for a split second, I could have sworn I smelled something, a faint, unfamiliar scent, like damp earth and a brand of cheap, musky cologne. I told myself it was the old building, the pipes, anything. I slammed the closet door and didn't open it again until morning. This is when the self-doubt really kicked in. Was I just stressed? Was the pressure of living alone for the first time getting to me? I started leaving little traps for myself. I'd balance a business card on top of my apartment door before I left. It was always in place when I returned. I'd take a picture of my desk before I went to bed. In the morning, everything would be exactly as I had left it. I was starting to feel like I was losing my mind, manufacturing a mystery where there was only my own anxiety. The rational part of my brain was telling me I was being paranoid. But the primal, animal part, the part that senses a predator in the tall grass, was screaming at me that I was not alone. The turning point from unease to genuine fear came a week later. I have a cat, a little shadow of a creature named Luna. She's usually a brave, curious cat, but she had started acting strangely. She had stopped sleeping at the foot of my bed, opting instead to hide under the couch.
And she would sometimes just sit in the middle of the living room and stare, unblinking, at one specific spot on the wall. A blank spot, right next to the large built-in bookshelf that had come with the apartment. One afternoon, I was sketching on the couch, and Luna was doing her weird staring thing. Then she let out a low, guttural hiss I'd never heard before. Her back arched, her fur stood on end, and she stared at that wall as if a demon were about to phase through it. The silence that followed was so absolute, so heavy, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I didn't hear anything, but she did. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old building was a footstep. Every groan of the pipes was a whisper. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my ears straining for any sound. And that's when I decided I needed proof. Not for the police, not for Chloe, but for myself. I needed to know if I was going crazy. The next day, I bought a small, discreet security camera, the kind people use as a nanny cam. It was tiny, easily hidden. I placed it on the top shelf of the bookshelf, nestled between a stack of old National Geographics and a ceramic vase. It had a perfect, wide-angle view of the living room, the front door, and the hallway leading to my bedroom. I set it to record on motion detection and tried to put it out of my mind. For 2 days, nothing happened. I'd anxiously scrubbed through the footage each morning, my heart pounding. All I saw was myself puttering around, Luna chasing sunbeams. The feeling of foolishness was immense. I was the crazy person who had bought a spy camera to watch her own empty apartment. I almost turned it off. On the third morning, I almost didn't even check the footage. I was late for a virtual meeting and I just wanted to get on with my day. But something compelled me. I opened the app, my thumb hovering over the timeline. There was a notification. Motion detected at 3:17 a.m. My blood turned to ice water. I wasn't home at 3:17 a.m. I had been in bed, asleep. I tapped on the clip. The footage was grainy, the room bathed in the monochrome gray of night vision. For the first few seconds, it was still. Then I saw it, the movement. It wasn't the front door. It was the wall Luna was always staring at. The large built-in bookshelf that I had assumed was a permanent fixture wasn't. It swung inwards, silently, like a secret door in a movie. A figure emerged from the blackness behind it. A man. He was tall, thin, dressed in dark clothes. He moved with a quiet, unnerving confidence, a familiarity that made my skin crawl. He wasn't a burglar. Burglars are frantic, they rush. This man moved like he owned the place. He walked into my living room, his gaze sweeping across my things. He picked up one of my paintings that was resting on an easel, studying it. He ran a hand along the back of my sofa. He went into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and drank directly from my carton of orange juice.
I felt a wave of revulsion so strong I nearly threw up. He then walked down the short hallway and stood, for a full 2 minutes, just outside my bedroom door. He was just standing there, listening. The video had no audio, but I can imagine it, the sound of my own soft breathing from inside the room. Finally, he turned, walked back to the bookshelf, and slipped back into the darkness from which he came. The shelf swung shut, leaving no trace. It was seamless. I watched the clip 3 times, unable to process what I was seeing. The world tilted on its axis. This wasn't a ghost. This wasn't my imagination. This was real. A man was living in my walls. He had been there the whole time. The thermostat, the moved objects, the scraping sound in the closet. My closet shared a wall with the space behind that bookshelf. The smell. Luna's fear. It all crashed down on me in a tidal wave of horrifying clarity. He hadn't been breaking in. He had always been in. The entire time I had felt safe, I had been in a cage with a predator. My first instinct was to run, to grab my keys and my cat and just leave everything behind. But where would I go? And what would I tell people? The police had already been skeptical of my feeling of being watched. Would they believe me now? I had the video, yes, but a part of me, a cold calculating part I didn't know I possessed, knew I couldn't just run. This man had violated my life in the most intimate way possible. He had turned my sanctuary into his playground. I felt an unexpected surge of ice-cold rage. He wasn't going to just scare me away. This was my home. I'd worked too hard for it. I was going to take it back. I spent the rest of the day in a fugue state, going through the motions of my job while my mind raced. I couldn't eat. Every sound made me jump. I kept glancing at the bookshelf, which now looked like a monolithic tombstone in my living room. I felt his presence constantly, a suffocating weight in the air. I imagined him back there, in the dark, listening to me type, listening to me breathe. I felt like a bug under a microscope. At this point, I felt so trapped and alone I didn't know what to do. The police might not respond fast enough. Confronting him myself was out of the question. I felt utterly powerless. Honestly, what would you have done in this situation? Would you have gathered your most important belongings and just left, abandoning everything for your safety? Or would you have stayed to fight for your home, to make sure this person was caught? Let me know in the comments, because I genuinely struggled with this for hours. That evening, I formulated a plan. It was risky, but it was the only thing I could think of. I called Chloe. I told her I was having a fumigation done in my apartment for a supposed bug problem, and asked if Luna and I could stay with her for a couple of days. She agreed instantly, no questions asked. I packed a small bag for myself and Luna's carrier, making a show of.
I talked loudly to myself, as if I were on the phone with the exterminator, confirming the time they would be arriving tomorrow morning. I wanted him to hear. I wanted him to think the apartment would be empty. My hope was that his curiosity, his arrogance, would get the better of him. He'd want to use the opportunity to have the run of the place. Before I left, I set up a second camera. This one was in my bedroom, hidden in a plant on my dresser, facing the door. Then I did the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I left my apartment, my home, knowing that a monster was lurking inside its very bones, and that I was walking into a trap of my own making. Staying at Chloe's was torture. I barely slept. I kept checking the live feed from the cameras on my phone. For hours, there was nothing but stillness. I started to think I had been wrong, that he had somehow known and was now gone for good. But then, around 1 a.m., I saw it. The bookcase swung open. He stepped out, but this time he was different. He was more relaxed. He wasn't wearing dark clothes, just a simple t-shirt and jeans. He walked around the apartment with a sense of ownership that was chilling. He turned on my TV, flipped through the channels. He sat on my couch. He picked up my sketchbook and slowly, page by page, looked through my private drawings. The violation was so profound it felt physical. I was watching a stranger leisurely tour the landscape of my life, my thoughts, my dreams. He spent nearly an hour in the living room before he headed for my bedroom. My heart hammered against my chest. This was it. He pushed open my bedroom door and stepped inside. The second camera caught him perfectly. He walked over to my bed, ran his hand over my pillow. He opened my closet and sifted through my clothes. Then he did something that made my stomach churn. He went to my dresser, opened the top drawer, and took out a silk scarf I owned. He brought it to his face and inhaled deeply. Then he just stood there, in the middle of my room, holding my scarf. That's when I called 911. My voice was a choked whisper. There is a man in my apartment. I am not there, but I am watching him on a security camera right now. He lives inside my walls. I had to repeat that last part 3 times before the dispatcher understood. The sheer insanity of it. I gave them the address, my apartment number, and a key I had left under the mat for them. I stressed that they had to be quiet, no sirens. I stayed on the line, my eyes glued to the phone screen, watching this man in my bedroom, completely oblivious. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only 6 or 7 minutes before I saw the first sign of the police on the live feed from the living room camera. The front door handle jiggled. Then the door swung open. 2 officers entered, guns drawn, moving with silent, practiced efficiency. The man in my bedroom must have heard something because his head snapped up.
He dropped the scarf and his entire body went rigid. He looked towards the bedroom door, his face a mask of confusion that quickly morphed into panic. He darted, not for the hallway, but for the wall that connected to the hidden space. He was trying to get back to his den. But he was too late. The officers were already at the bedroom door. "Police, don't move!" I heard their muffled shouts through the phone. I saw the man on my screen throw his hands up in the air. The feed was shaky as I saw the officers apprehend him. It was over. It was finally over. I collapsed onto Chloe's couch, the phone slipping from my trembling hands, and finally let myself sob. My heart was still hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and relief. The nightmare was over, but the feeling of violation would stay with me forever. Before I tell you what happened next and how this changed my life, if you're finding this story as intense as I did living it, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps a lot and ensures you don't miss future narratives. The aftermath was a blur of police statements, locksmiths, and horrified building managers. The man's name was David. He was a handyman who had done freelance work for the previous owners of the building. He had discovered the hidden space, a series of small connected crawl spaces between apartments, likely used for maintenance or something more illicit 100 years ago, and had become obsessed with it. When my apartment, which had the main access point, became vacant, he saw his chance. He had moved his own meager belongings into the dark space behind my bookshelf, a sleeping bag, some bottled water, packaged food, and a bucket for a toilet. He had been living there for over a month before I even moved in and had been sharing my home with me for nearly 3 months. The police said he was what they called a phasmid, named after the stick insects that blend into their surroundings. People who get a thrill from living undetected in other people's homes. They don't necessarily want to steal or harm. The charge comes from the act of watching, of being an invisible, intimate part of a stranger's life. He had tapped into my electricity to charge his phone. He had used my Wi-Fi. He had learned the rhythm of my days, the sound of my footsteps, the songs I hummed when I worked. When I asked him why he did it, his only answer was chillingly simple. I was lonely.
I sold most of my furniture and found a new place on the other side of town, a modern, characterless new build with thin walls where I could hear my neighbors cough, and I was grateful for every sound. There were no secret spaces there. It's been over a year now, and I'm still dealing with the fallout. I have trouble being alone in my own home. I double and triple check the locks. I have a state-of-the-art security system. The slightest unfamiliar noise sends a jolt of adrenaline through me. He never physically harmed me, but he stole something more valuable than any possession, my sense of security, the feeling of being truly safe in my own space. It makes you wonder how well you can ever really know a place or a person. The police said he would likely get a few years for unlawful entry and stalking, but I try not to think about him. Sometimes, though, I wonder, do you think he would have eventually done something worse, or was the act of watching enough for him? Have you ever had a gut feeling that something was wrong in your own home? That feeling of being watched when no one is there? It turns out, sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones that jump out of the dark. They're the ones who have been there the whole time, silently watching. Share your thoughts and any theories you might have in the comments below. Stay safe out there.